Hello, and welcome to Moments in History. I'm Linda Shenton-Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. While researching my stories, I unearthed tons of intriguing historical information that can't possibly end up in my books. So I've created this channel so I can share these tidbits with you. Thank you so much for stopping by to watch. Merriam-Webster defines the word propaganda as the spreading of ideas, information, or rumor for the purpose of helping or injuring an institution, a cause, or a person. During World War II, both the Allies and Axis powers used this tool at home and abroad. The Office of War Information, also known as OWI, was created on June 13, 1942 by Executive Order 9182, the primary purpose being to, quote, formulate and execute information programs to promote in the United States and abroad understanding of the status and progress of the war effort and of war policies, activities, and aims of the U.S. government. Fairly long-winded, wouldn't you say? The thought was to centralize the many information services of the United States government and create a single line of communication about the war to the American public. The creation of OWI consolidated the functions of the Office of Facts and Figures, the OWI's direct predecessor, the Office of Government Reports, and the Division of Information of the Office for Emergency Management. So long-winded. The Foreign Information Service, a division of the Office of Coordinator of Information, became the core of the overseas branch of the OWI. Interestingly, Elmer Davis, a popular CBS radio news commentator and former New York Times president, was appointed by Roosevelt to head the organization. Many in Congress did not like the operation of the OWI on U.S. soil. There was a fear that an American propaganda machine could too closely resemble that of Joseph Goebbels' operation in Nazi Germany. In addition, previous attempts at propaganda under the Committee on Public Information, also known as the Creel Committee, during World War I were viewed as a failure. Knowing that the American public favored an isolationist or non-interventionist policy, some in Congress were hesitant to support a pro-war propaganda campaign that targeted Americans. The press was also not in favor of a centralized agency, afraid an organization of its type would stifle freedom of journalism. However, in the wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor, the president felt the need for coordinated and properly disseminated wartime information from the military and administration to the public, and it outweighed the fears associated with American propaganda. As a result, OWI was authorized to use press, radio, motion picture, and other facilities information programs designed to facilitate the development of an informed and intelligent understanding at home and abroad of the status and the progress of the war effort, and also of the war policies, activities, and aims of the U.S. government. One of the tools that was used was imagery. Photographers were sent across the country to document Americans doing patriotic work. They photographed workers at factories and on farms, children gathering scrap, men and women in uniform, and social change in the form of positive images of women and African Americans doing their bit. The images were then made into posters that were hung everywhere. They encouraged Americans to join up, plant a victory garden, stay quiet, work in factories and on farms, watch out for the enemy, and most of all, support the war effort. Radio programs, newsreels, and films were used extensively. Davis was quoted in 1942 as saying, "The easiest way to inject a propaganda idea into most people's minds is to let it go through the medium of an entertainment picture when they do not realize they're being propagandized." I would believe that the Axis powers felt the same way. The OWI's Domestic Radio Bureau produced series such as This Is Our Enemy in the spring of 1942, which dealt with Germany, Japan, and Italy, Uncle Sam, which dealt with domestic themes, and Hasten the Day in August 1943, which focused on the home front. Later, radio producer Norman Corwin produced several series for the OWI, including An American in England, An American in Russia, and Passport for Adams, which starred Robert Young. In 1941, Roosevelt launched the Foreign Information Service, which included the United States Information Service, posts around the world to assist foreign media. In the early weeks of 1942, FIS began shortwave broadcasts that eventually became known as Voice of America. But the patchwork of activity lacked cohesion. Tension between government policy and the political views of individual reporters also surfaced. Some Voice of America writers were overly enthusiastic about the U.S. alliance with the Soviet Union, and a few at OWI and VOA were explicitly affiliated with the Communist Party. At times, Voice of America broadcasts were at odds with U.S. foreign policy. One of the most notorious clashes came when Italy left the war in July of 1943. A VOA report included a reference to, quote-unquote, the moronic little king of Italy, and dubbed the interim leader of the country a, quote-unquote, high-ranking fascist. The slip made the front page of the New York Times. Other slips became visible only in retrospect. Ouch! By July of 1942, OWI administrators realized that the best way to reach American audiences was to present war films in conjunction with feature films. So the organization's Bureau of Motion Pictures worked with the Hollywood movie studios to produce films that advanced American war aims. Successful films depicted the Allied armed forces as valiant freedom fighters and advocated for civilian participation, such as conserving fuel or donating food to the troops. OWI's presence in Hollywood deepened throughout World War II, and by 1943, every major Hollywood studio, with the exception of Paramount Pictures, allowed OWI to examine their film scripts. OWI evaluated whether each film would promote the honor of the Allies' mission. In conjunction with the War Relocation Authority, the OWI produced a series of documentary films related to the internment of Japanese Americans. Many of the films were designed to educate the general public on the internment and to counter the tide of anti-Japanese sentiment in the country. Interestingly, OWI also worked with Japanese-language newspapers to disseminate information to the internees and to encourage Japanese American internees to resettle outside camp or to enter military service. According to several reports, the OWI suffered from conflicting aims and poor management. Elmer Davis, who wanted to see that the American people are truthfully informed, clashed with the military that routinely held information for quote-unquote public safety. Further, OWI employees grew ever more dissatisfied with what they regarded as a turn-away from the fundamental complex issues of the war in favor of manipulation and stylized exhortation. On April 14, 1943, several OWI writers resigned from the office and released a scathing statement to the press explaining that they felt they could no longer give an objective picture of the war because, quote, high-pressure promoters who prefer slick salesmanship to honest information, unquote, dictated OWI decision-making. Many scholars and historians feel that the overseas branch enjoyed greater success and less controversy than the domestic branch. Abroad, the OWI operated a psychological warfare branch which used propaganda to terrorize enemy forces in combat zones, in addition to informing civilian populations in Allied camps. Leaflet warfare gained popularity during World War II and was utilized in regions such as North Africa, Italy, Germany, the Philippines, and Japan. For example, in Japan, the OWI printed and dropped over 180 million leaflets, with about 98 million being dropped in the summer months of 1945. Leaflets dropped in Tunisia read, "You are surrounded," or "Drowning is a nasty death." Millions of leaflets dropped in Sicily read, "The time has come for you to decide whether Italians shall die for Mussolini and Hitler or live for Italy and civilization." OWI also used newspapers and publicized magazines to further American aims. Magazines distributed to foreign audiences, such as Victory, intended to convey to foreign allied civilians that American civilians were contributing to the war. Victory showcased America's manufacturing power and sought to foster an appreciation for the American lifestyle. The OWI also utilized unconventional propaganda vehicles known as, quote, "specialty items," unquote. Specific examples of these items included packets of seeds, matchbooks, soap paper, and sewing kits. The packets of seeds had an American flag and message printed on the outside that identified the donor. Each matchbook was inscribed with Norman Rockwell's 4 Freedoms on the inside cover. Soap paper was etched with the message, "From your friends in the United Nations, dip in water, use like soap, wash off the Nazi dirt." More crass items included sewing kit pincushions shaped like a human rear end with a caricatured face of either Hitler or Japanese General Toho on the reverse side. One of the most bold of all OWI operations occurred in Luxembourg. Known as Operation Annie, the United States 12th Army Group ran a secret radio station from 2 to 6:30 a.m. every morning from a house in Luxembourg, pretending to be loyal Rhinelanders under Nazi occupation. They spoke of Nazi commanders hiding their desperate position from the German public, which caused dissent among Nazi supporters. Further, they led Nazi forces into an Allied trap and then staged an Allied attack on the Annie radio office to maintain the cover. Congress continued to oppose the domestic operations of the OWI, which resulted in increasingly curtailed funds. At one point, Congress accused OWI as President Roosevelt's campaign agency and pounced on any and all miscommunications and scandals as a reason for disbandment. In 1943, OWI's appropriations were cut out of the following year's budget and only restored with strict restrictions on their domestic capabilities. Many of the overseas branch offices were closed, as well as the Motion Picture Bureau. By 1944, OWI operated mostly in the foreign field, contributing to undermining enemy morale. The office was then terminated effective September 15, 1945, by Executive Order 9608. President Truman cited the OWI for outstanding contribution to victory, but saw no reason to continue funding the agency post-war. The international offices were transferred to the State Department, and the United States Information Service and Office of Strategic Services assumed many of the information gathering, analyzing, and disseminating responsibilities. I hope you've enjoyed today's moment in history. If you'd like to learn even more history, please stop by my blog, found on my website at www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And please consider subscribing to my channel and click the bell icon to receive notifications of episodes that release on the 2nd and 4th Fridays of each month. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your week.